Hello, good afternoon, one and all. Welcome to another session of Meet the Leader by Kerala Startup Mission's webinar series. And today we have Mr. Marut Setia from the Chief Marketing Officer, GE Healthcare South Asia region. It's a privilege, Marut, to have you for the session. Kind of be here. So the Meet the Leader is one edition where we bring in industry leaders and give a platform where the startups also can interact with industry leaders, and that's the biggest learning curve for them. Uh, just to the attend all here, just drop a hi or if I'm audible, respond in the chat line so that we know that you're audible. Please I request all to kind of put a line hello or hi, whatever in the chat. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Nishan, for responding. So, Madhu, what I do is so as I told you, the session is more like we'll have your presentation and then we'll have a Q&A after that, probably a 20 to 30-minute presentation time of yours, and then we'll take the Q&A. The attendees can meanwhile raise the question in the Q&A tab or in the chat session. From there, I will curate, me and Prajit will curate the questions and put it across to you. Okay.
Excellent. Sounds good.
So, it's my privilege to introduce you, Marut. Marut is a seasoned healthcare professional and also one of the driver of sustainable growth for the healthcare in the region, and is a strong believer of data insights and analytics to develop a degree of understanding of customer needs. Marut has been a thought leader in developing innovative digital solutions, especially the AR/VR gaming simulation and remote tools for next generation healthcare system. So, Marut, Kerala is one, unlike the other ecosystem, Kerala is one place where you find,
എന്റെ ദൈവമേ.
hello,
ഫു.
Prajit, request to kind of please mute. Hello.
മിണ്ടരുത്, മിണ്ടരുത്.
Sorry for the disturbance. So, Maruta was telling, so Kerala is one ecosystem where by policy we support mostly tech innovative startups. So you find a lot of AR, VR, and
ആ
emerging tech startups in Kerala.
ഹലോ.
So they are all kind of
ആ
excited to kind of listen to you because
ശരി
of
ശരി.
this particular bent of yours in digital solution. And also, uh, you being one of the person who represent the international forum like WHO and IFSC on behalf of GE, that's again one. I mean, it's a privilege to host you, man. So, over to you, Maru. Please, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead and kind of.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the startup founders. Listen, I'm hoping that my screen is visible, and I'll start.
The
Works?
screen is visible. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So just a very quick introduction. I'm reasonably sure, since people on this forum are mostly from healthcare domain, so you would know what GE does. So I won't spend too long in talking about our credentials, but talk a little bit more about the thought process that we are seeing in the industry, especially as I was talking to the team members of the Kerala Startup Mission. The idea here is to talk about how things have shifted into this post-COVID-19 world and how the thought processes have changed. So I'm going to spend most of my time there. But just for everybody to get on the same page, GE is the largest medtech company in South Asia, and we have a range of products, obviously, which go across the range from critical care to cardiac care. And over the last few years, there has been a huge amount of emphasis on developing digital tool, AI, AI-based tools to help the healthcare providers in the country to deliver better patient care. And what we try to do is try to be the medium of innovation, not just for our healthcare providers, but also people like you who run a lot of startups. We, as of today, run a program called Edison, which enrolls startups every year. And we take 6 or 7 startups every year, we mentor them and help them develop a commercializable product. As of now, we are into our first cohort, 6 months into the program, and we are very encouraged by the success that we see with some of those those startups. And I'm hoping that I get to interact with you guys after this session more and more, and see if some of you guys can actually come on to our Edison platform. So that's a very quick introduction on what GE is trying to do. I mean, you know these numbers, so I'm gonna skip. But this is how we used to see the world pre-COVID-19. So if you ask me, these slides were made late last year, early this year, when we were thinking about India strategy. How do we think about GE Healthcare India? We always thought of, hey, huge disease burden. Diabetes is a huge killer. Cardiovascular disease is a huge killer. We are seeing a reduction in mortality rate when you look at communicable diseases. So the focus always was, how do you work with the government? How do you work with the providers to develop the infrastructure? How can you increase the number of beds? How can more doctors can take up? Can you talk about task shifting? Can you have nurses and technicians do more? Can you spend more on their education? How can insurance penetration go up, which will drive higher volumes and bring in more people into the formal healthcare system? So that was the crux of the discussion. We always thought of India as a huge untapped market, and all the stats that you see on the page hint towards that. I mean, be it the government spend as a percentage of GDP, be it the insurance coverage that I was talking to you about, be it the number of doctors, every indicator points towards the fact that there is a huge amount of untapped potential in the healthcare market. And if the policies are set straight, if we have the right players in the industry, this could give a huge fillip to the healthcare system, overall healthcare system in the country, thereby providing better patient care and giving more opportunities to companies like us and yours. That was always the narrative. We always thought of non-communicable diseases as the big burden, because we always thought 45% of deaths now are NCD death. So they're trauma death, they are cardiovascular death, they're diabetes deaths. So how do you prevent those? So that was the big thought process. I told you about healthcare penetration, insurance penetration, how it is so low. And even our prime minister used to talk about universal healthcare coverage, the Arogya Bharat scheme, the scheme that was launched late last year, again pointed towards that shift from more communicable diseases, more immunization towards a more NCD kind of coverage. We always thought of our market being very dynamic with a lot of disruptors. Some people on the call would attest to that. A lot of AI based players coming in, and there was always a risk of commoditization of these basic services. X-ray, for example, is already commoditized in our world, right? So basic things are already getting commoditized. We were talking about PE investment. You guys must have seen a huge amount of PE money coming in, some consolidation that Fortis and Manipal Group went through. So again, there was a lot of uh, the trends and dynamics were more towards how do you grow the industry, how do you bring down the NCD burden, how do you make sure that the regulatory policies are driven in the right direction, medical devices, the local manufacturing can be encouraged, right? So that was the pre-COVID-19 era for us. The discussion was typically based on these 7 topics that you see on the screen now. You flip to early March 2020, and the whole discussion on what we like to say has gone back to basics. We are back to worrying about communicable diseases. We are back to making sure that we are protected from a large scale pandemic like COVID-19 in this. And what has opened our eyes, the government eyes, and everybody in the healthcare system, they've again started thinking about how do you think about the communicable part of the diseases? How do you make sure that we are protected from outside in risks? In this case, unfortunately, China, and inside out risk. I mean, nobody wants some of the communicable diseases that have been eradicated across the globe to start in India and then spread. I mean, you know what is, from a stigma standpoint, what is happening with China. You don't want that to happen to India either, right? So the whole narrative has changed, and this is what we did 2 weeks back, right? So now we are talking about new platforms. We're talking about telemedicine was a concept that started some green or saw some green shoots in India 5 or 6 years back, but it never succeeded. The amount of or the number of discussions that I've had on telemedicine over the last couple of weeks or maybe couple of months with state governments, with private players, the amount of interest has suddenly hyped up in these areas, and naturally so, because not only do you want to prevent people passing on diseases to each other, you also want to protect your healthcare workers. So again, a huge amount of interest in this space. We're talking about remote, on-demand customer experience. People don't want to wait anymore for somebody to come and travel to their location and help them. Everything we are talking about remote. We are talking about, this is a problem that needs to be solved now, because, like, I mean, I'll give you a COVID-19 example. If you have a COVID-19 patient in your hospital today, you don't want to wait 3 days down the line to get the protocols on how do you treat it. You want those answers now. So that's what is leading to a huge resurgence in this on-demand modernized customer experience space, right? You guys know a lot about flexible and work from home kind of productivity solutions. People are talking a lot about AI based solutions for detecting images. There was always a big challenge between the availability of radiologists or sonologists in our case versus what was needed. So there's already this race to develop the next AI protocol, but that race has just accelerated, and the amount of interest that this industry is going to get over a period of next couple of years is going to be phenomenal, not just in India but across the globe. Uh, MedTech has now, will see, in our opinion, a complete resurgence in terms of level of interest. The traditional players will have an option to quickly innovate and get ahead of the curve, or there'll be one startup or the other who will partner with a Google or a Microsoft or Amazon and completely flip the demand from where it is. The locus of control, we believe there is a risk that the locus of control may completely change. So we are trying to get ahead of that whole curve. And in the end, I think government, you guys have seen this in the way the government has responded, not just in India, but across the globe. People are talking about the dead science of public health, which was considered a few months back as as as, as a science that people in Africa need. So anybody used to do public health response, the first buy station for them to go gain experience was Africa. With this whole thing, with whole COVID-19, that'll completely change. Now, the importance of public health would again, there'll be a resurgence in that. People will talk about biosecurity, people will talk about developing response to disaster responses and practicing those. So the things that had completely disappeared from the developed and developing world over last 10 years will see a resurgence again. And we do feel that everybody on the call here, and including GE, has a part to play in it. I mean, you guys probably know about the whole payers infrastructure, but we do feel that the value curve will shift towards more value and super value products. People don't want to buy the next big nice gadget now. But people are going to talk about how do I get frugal innovation in the door to make sure that we are controlling expenses, because you don't know when another COVID-19 will strike and you'll have to shut down your diagnostic center for a month and lose the cash flow. So again, a lot of emphasis on frugality versus quality versus the latest technology, if you will. I think I already spoke a little bit about the burden again will shift towards communicable diseases, because while NCDs are kill a lot of people, you don't see a huge increase in infection rate or in death as you see in a communicable disease like a TB or a COVID-19 or one of those. So you would see a lot more focus that will be placed towards this area. We're already seeing a resurgence in home health. The government is talking about quarantining people in their homes. So the demand for example, pulse oximeters, which can be used at home, has increased 3x in last 2 months. So people will look for solutions that are going to be home based, that can be used with minimum level of expertise and can deliver instant results. So those technologies, those solutions, and if some of you guys are working on those areas, I would I would encourage you to keep trudging along, because those are the technologies that they'll really see a huge amount of interest, not just from users but also from investors. I spoke about public health as a national security, but in the context of supply chains, it's going to change a lot. I mean, India saw, I don't know if you guys know, but 70% of the APIs that India needs to manufacture drugs comes from China. So even though India has a very thriving and a huge pharmaceutical industry, the base APIs that are needed for formulation of these drugs actually come from China. So while we say that we are a big factory for the world for manufacturing drugs, if the base ingredients come from somewhere else, you are at a risk of disruption in times like these. So you will see a lot of investment going into uh, creating some of these local supply chains, which would enable the industry to be more self-reliant. Yesterday, our Prime Minister spoke about using Indian-made goods and putting up, and there is a financial plan that is being put up towards that. And I do feel that you will see a lot more of these ideas, these discussions happening in the government forum. So, if you basis what we've just spoken about, basis what we've talked about in terms of trend, think about what are the new opportunities that people like yourself can get into. I feel these are the five places which which are very ripe for disruption, and there's a huge amount of interest from established players and VCs to fund AI in health, home health. I already spoke about localization, innovative commercial models, rental models, lease models, and of course biosecurity. Now, I don't think we have time to talk about all of these, so I'm going to pick up the AI piece, which I feel uh, we are seeing a lot of interest from GE and from a larger stakeholder group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI in healthcare. And as you see, it's a very, very crowded space. I mean, today you have a lot of these data science groups that have come into, I'm sorry, that have come into this space, and a lot of smaller companies which are trying to create impact. And the space that I am most interested, obviously, in and have a little bit of knowledge about is the innovation and AI in medical imaging. And you again see there's a lot of investment that is going into this space. There are a lot of new players that are coming in, and this is by far the most important modality, if you will, in the healthcare space where AI is disrupting. And the reason is pretty simple. Most of healthcare imaging or diagnostic imaging, as we call it, is based on visual pattern recognition. So it generates a lot of data. It generates a lot more experimental room for experiment for somebody to come in and analyze those patterns and support the decision maker. So this availability of data and the fact that image recognition in itself has had huge amount of advancements outside the healthcare space makes it a very relatable field for people to come in and disrupt. And to aggravate the cycle, if you all to accelerate the cycle, you also see that there is a huge amount of mismatch in the skill set that is available in the world versus what the demand is today. Even in developed world like America and Europe, you see there is a shortage of radiologists. If you go to Africa and some of Latin American countries, you would see a big mismatch. So people welcome intervention like this in these countries, and which makes it a big target for innovation and disruption, if you will. So if you really think about what those use cases could be, and I do believe that some of you probably are already working on these use cases, it starts as low or as basic as assisted outcomes. And I know we are funding a startup which is trying to help the clinician detect breast cancer with 90% higher accuracy than that is being done today. We see that the assistance that some of these tools and AI protocols, neural networks that have been trained can provide is helping the decision maker to improve their accuracy by at least 90%. So we do see that a good pull from the healthcare practitioner towards these technologies. It also helps them, as the page says, to eliminate some of the tasks. I mean, not everything needs to be seen by radiologists. Some of these things are easy to spot and can be spotted with a very high level of confidence, with a very high CI, by a neural network or by a well-trained AI protocol. So a lot of that is happening. We do see a lot of this going into reducing errors, and India by far has become a hub of this whole teleradiology solution. And AI is really helping us accelerate reduction of cost, and also improving the capacity of the people that we already have. Right? And so what this leads to, if you dovetail it with our context, the emerging market context, see, our legal system is not extremely strong, right? Our skill set in healthcare is not extremely strong. So we are okay, unlike US or let's say Western Europe, we are okay to live with a good enough system, right? Which can be trained over a period of time, because every hospital, unfortunately, in India uses a different protocol for detection a different disease, right? Or the same disease. So what they want is something that is good enough, which can be trained over a period of time, basis their protocols, basis their organizations, the protocols, right? So that's something that India is willing to live with, which again enables or accelerates the disruption. I mean, you can look at what has happened. 4 billion worth of deals have happened in 2019, and this number is poised to grow multifold, given the kind of situation that we are in today. Right? However, on the flip side of this, and this probably is my last slide, uh, all is not hunky dory, right? It's not very easy to get into this space and create a model that is credible. As the patient, there is a huge amount of rejection. I'll give you one example that I've seen very recently. In case of an X-ray system, while the accuracy of detecting lesions, detecting TB can be trained with a tremendous amount of data, and it's easy, but the way an X-ray is taken in a particular hospital has a huge amount of impact on the end result or the end prognosis. So we have seen AI protocol neural networks that give you a 99% plus accuracy in a test environment. But as soon as they are put into a practice environment, due to multiple reasons, due to difference in the way the protocols are set up, based on the skill set of the operator, it has a huge amount of variation. We have seen uh, protocol which are 99% accurate or 98% accurate in a trial setup go down to like 75%, and we realize that there are a lot of gaps in theory and in practice, and they need to be worked upon consistently towards making those better. And I think I'll talk about one more thing here before I turn it back to you guys for a question. uh, the quality standards, while they are pretty low, the bar is pretty low in emerging countries, they are being developed. We do see a lot of discussions going around digital health, AI in health, and what kind of protocols can be used. And you would see over a period of next 2 to 3 years a huge amount of regulation or a good thought process around how do you regulate and make sure that not anybody can come and create these solutions, if you will. So I do feel that overall there is a opportunity for the industry to get disrupted. I do see there is a lot of capability in India and across the globe to be that crucible of change in the way at least the medical devices part of the practice is run. So I do see a huge opportunity, but I would caveat it that if this is a part of the industry that you're interested in, especially in the kind of environment we are in, make or iterate your approach versus trying to create a product that fits all protocols, because I personally have never seen in my last few years of being in healthcare a protocol that fits all. With that, I'll pause here and we'll see if there are any questions.
So what we'll do is I'll curate some of the questions from the Q&A tab and put it across to you. And also for the last like after 3:45 to 4 o'clock, we'll take direct questions.
Sure thing.
So attendees, one request to you: you can type in the question if you want in the Q&A tab now, or you can raise your hand or put a line in the chat tab so that we can give you the permission to talk. Please raise your hand, or so after 3:45 we'll open up for the direct question. So, Marut, some of the questions from the Q&A, which I find interesting is, so one is about, the first one is about the collaboration policy of G. So how will a startup co-create a product along with G? I mean, to be specific, if a startup have a particular device, it has been proven and kind of tested out, how can they co-create? What is
Yeah.
the process?
So we open this up every, if I'm not wrong, June or July. We open we it's open request for applications where you can put in your startup application. We are looking for somebody who has already developed a tested minimal viable product, and we can work with them to make the product more robust and then help you commercialize it. What we are hesitant to do, we don't want to get into a very early stage startup where the proof of concept or minimal viable product is not yet created, because uh, we won't be able to add too much value to it. So we're looking for partners in the space that we are good at, in the medtech space, in the AI space, or AI for medtech space. We're looking for those kind of partners. Second condition is that you should have a minimum viable product which is tested, and our contribution would be, of course, in addition to small amount of money, we'll try to help you make that product better and then help you commercialize that. I don't know if that answers that question.
Do you have a specific program for startup, or you consider startup which has been referred to you by your partners, or
No, there is a specific program. In fact, you see it on the screen. It's called G Edison Platform, X
okay,
Incubator. And if you search with that keyword, you would hit the links, which will have all the information around the program, and also when the next window of opportunity opens up for anybody to apply.
okay, interesting. And specifically coming to COVID context, do you have any specific program for a startup to develop in the context of COVID?
See, not really, because see, most of our products and services hover around addressing the non-communicable disease burden and not on the
Hmm.
communicable side. So, while we are working in telehealth and digital health space, so tele ICUs, and in that space, this is not an area where we are looking for partnerships or collaborations. At least not now. But you know what? Things could be very different 3 months down the line if this continues.
Okay. So the other question is regarding one of the conversation I had with one of the startup founders this week. So most of the main constraints by the startups facing are the
Yeah.
funding. So he was actually mentioning he has developed an amazing product which he find has a use case, and kind of, if he could develop at least 100 products, he would be able to scale it up. But he has fund only developing four. So what is your recommendation for people who face this issue, like the fund issue, and but they are sure that they have an amazing product in that?
Yeah. So listen, I think we are all ears for looking at those kind of innovations as long as they are in the area that we are interested in, which is medtech space, right? So, if you feel that that startup that you're talking about is close to what we are trying to do, I'm more than happy to make the right connections and see if there is a way for us to come in and help. But there are so many other incubators, which I really feel that 2019 has been probably one of the best years for the startups in terms of both raising funding as well as getting the mentorship that they need. So I don't think it's too much of a challenge. But if there is anything that we can help with, I'm more than happy to make the right connections.
Okay, thank you. So, the other question is, what do you think the emerging trends in the healthcare devices is going to be? Like now, you can find a lot of startups kind of looking at their product line and trying to develop a lot of new products. So, what should be their design philosophy or trend feature philosophy? What is your take on that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest trend that I see is that there is this movement from the best possible technological product to from a hardware standpoint to something that is workable with a much stronger software and AI laid on top of it, which then cleans the image better. So at the end of the day, our field is all about getting a high quality clean image which can be used by the healthcare professional to diagnose. That's the game we are in. And right now the whole effort, let's say if you take MRI as an example, is to create a hardware that generates the right image. So 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla, 7 Tesla magnetic field. So as you make the magnetic field stronger, the clarity of image increases multifold, right? So that's what is happening today. What we are moving towards to say is that maybe I don't need the 3 Tesla or 1.5 Tesla. Maybe I can get that zero point 0.5 Tesla machine, which will generate a grainy image, but I can use a software or AI protocol, which a good highly trained neural network, which can help me clean the image, and I can get the same level of outcome from a diagnosis standpoint. So that's by far the biggest trend that we see in the medtech industry.
This in line with the philosophy of G that from $1,000 product to $1 product development, right? That's one school of thought you
Yeah, so
present.
we do have, so we used to call it, and we still probably call it the affordable care platform, right? The a good device doesn't have to be expensive. The challenge that company like ours have is that when we think of a product, when we think of product development, because 90% of our market is in developed world, US and Europe, the thought process while developing the product is a developed world mindset. So when you have to start selling that product in an emerging market, you try to from bells and whistles. So you try to take things out from the existing product. Now, unfortunately, that's not the best method of developing a product for emerging market, because it's not just the cost; it's also the environment that the product is being used in. So back in 2013 or 12, I think we created a whole team which is based out of Bangalore. We call it Affordable Care Platform (ACP), and this team started designing products from scratch. So there is there's nothing to box them. So the idea was that, why don't you start designing products which are completely for the emerging market? And we've seen some great success. Till now, about 36 commercial products have come out of that portfolio, from a lullaby warmer, which is less than $500, to a ECG, which reduced the cost of ECG from a GE standpoint by about 40%, to a CT scanner, which has the smallest footprint, by far the cheapest CT scanner in the country. And these products have been very, very successful for us, not just in India, but across the globe. I mean, the Rev ACT, which was the flagship project of the affordable care portfolio, is now by far the largest selling CT machine anywhere in the world at any point in time. So these kind of disruptions don't just disrupt emerging market, but they also, to some extent, disrupt a developed world, because there is nobody in the healthcare system that is not looking for saving costs without compromising quality. So these thought processes, which have been a hallmark of the Indian way of thinking, if you will, right? And kudos to the people from the startup world who have actually pioneered this thought process. This is what is the need for the future. That's the only way, because 17% spend on healthcare by US, 21% NHS cost in UK. These are unsustainable numbers. I mean, these are bound to change. They're bound to be challenged. And I hope that some of you guys will come up with that next level of thought process and help all of us, not just GE.
Completely. So this the other question is exactly in line with that. Maybe as your role as a member of the skill council. So the question is, what is G's policy in collaborating with academic institutions?
Yeah.
Will you support a young innovator in accelerating his product from a proof of concept to maybe from an ideation stage to a proof of concept? So how will you help this innovator?
Yeah, yeah. I think my friend Jibin is on the call, and he has put up this question. See, listen. There are multiple ways of collaboration. Some are easy to start with, some are difficult, but all of these have challenged the mindset of how a company like GE works. It's very difficult, for to be honest with you, and just to be very open, while we have collaborated with academic institutions, it has been outside India, more or less, mostly centered around US. So that thought process is very new, and we have tried to make that outreach to some higher quality institutes like Sarhadya and others in two formats. One, as a part of research collaboration, which are very small in number, where we're trying to co-create products. In this ACP is a big portfolio. I know we have a collaboration with IIT Madras in this respect. There is some collaboration with AIMS for research, and Narayana Hridyalaya. So that's one part of the collaboration. Specifically to answer your question on on collaborating on education and training. So we have tried to, right? But like I said, it's not an easy thought process for GE to kind of get into, because your cost can suddenly multiply as you go from collaborating with one institute to, let's say, five institutes. The cost suddenly multiplies very, very strongly. So we have tried in the past through HSSC, directly through GE, and some of those partnerships are working very well. uh, but it's a learning process, it's a learning curve for us.
The other question is from the AI. So, what is the scope of the nutrition management in healthcare using AI and other technology?
Yeah.
And since nutrition is one area where the rural also come into picture, the other question I will collaborate on. So, how to make medical infrastructure accessible to rural areas? So, what's your thought on?
Yeah, yeah. So let me answer this question in two ways: one from a GE lens and one from a non-GE lens, right? So let me start with the non-GE lens, right? Especially if you look at the environment that we are in today, you would certainly find, and it'll happen over a period of time, you will see that COVID-19 deaths in people who are malnutrition would see a spike at some point. Somebody, once the data is available, somebody's going to do that analysis and prove it. There's no doubt, because there is malnutrition has a connection with immunity that your body has, which obviously has a connection to how you can how you react to viruses like this, right? So if I leave my GE hat, I mean, I do feel that you will suddenly see a lot of surge in this space. You would see a lot of funding from NGOs. You'll see a lot of funding from philanthropy organizations like Tata Trusts and the Jindals of the world, Reliance, and all of those guys to invest in this area. This always has been a part of the portfolio. Nutrition has by far, in India at least, India and Africa, by far has a lot of money goes into that space. But given the scenario today, I think you will see a sharp uptick in the interest level of these foundations and philanthropists in nutrition space, because now you'll start the resurgence of communicable disease will start a whole new thought process, that if the host body can be strengthened, you can avoid some of these ailments to spread as they're spreading today. So I do feel there is a lot of opportunity there. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a sustainable model. Okay, while there are a lot of people who are working in this space, I haven't seen a model that is sustainable. I haven't seen a model that doesn't need funding at every step, every month, every year to sustain it. Right. So that has been the biggest gap or a loophole, if you will, in accelerating the work. So I know a lot of work has been done by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in this space, but again, nothing that I've seen has been sustainable. From if I wear the G hat now, listen,
Please go
rural,
ahead.
rural and tier two, tier three markets are the ones that's going to drive growth in 2020 and beyond. There is no doubt in my head about it. Okay, nutrition is just a part of it, right? But overall, if you look at these markets, the growth is going to come from Bharat, as our prime minister says, and not from India, because the bigger cities are now getting saturated. There is a lot of consolidations happening. PE has come in, so the focus is more on generating returns and less on increasing capacity, because to some extent most of the capacity of healthcare in the country lies in tier 1 and metro towns. So the opportunity, most of it lies in the rural side. Now nutrition is not a subject that we are very close to from a GE standpoint, but if anybody in the country who cares about healthcare and the healthcare and public healthcare system, and nutrition is not one of the topics that they are worrying about, then I think there's something fundamentally wrong in that approach. Does that make sense?
Agree with you on that. Yeah, exactly. So there are a couple of follow-up questions on the AI part. So I'll just take that now. So one question is, why do you think AI solutions are not able to deal with complex diseases as patients are still focused on physical professions? That's the first question.
Can you say it again?
The
Sorry,
next,
I missed it. Can you say that again?
uh, yeah. So why is AI solutions not able to deal with complex diseases as patients are still focused on physical professionals?
As
I
patients
mean,
are.
still focused on physical, going physically to the professions and professionals, physically to the doctors. and
Yeah.
the physical interaction. Why the physical interaction with the doctors is still relevant.
Got it. Got it.
And the
So,
other question is, how is AI going to change the genomics in the future?
oh, excellent. Okay. So, I think these are probably three questions. So let me start with the first one. Why is AI has not been able to create an impact on complex diseases? It's the availability of data, right? I mean, as you move from a mass disease like a TB, for example, and you move to, let's say, cancer, the availability of data for that particular strain of cancer suddenly goes down. The effort that is needed to collect that data is significantly higher. So to train a AI protocol or neural network with the level of accuracy that is needed for a more complex disease, a Parkinson's or such, the people find it, or the innovators find it difficult to get the right data to train the networks. Right? I don't think it's a capability issue in terms of having the right data models or having the right data science approach. I don't think that is the issue. I think it's the availability of data. And then, and we'll talk about genomics, and maybe I can answer that question together here. Uh, Again, it's the availability of data, right? I mean, the data that you collect in America for training a neural network or to research genomics is hardly valid in India, right? Is hardly valid in Southeast Asia, right? Because your structures are very different, right? So that is where I feel that. And I don't know if you guys read it. I think about a year back, a company in Singapore collected data for 30,000 Chinese and Asian population and sold that for $65 million to a American company, right? So data collation, and there are a lot of people in India. In fact, some of my colleagues from GE left and started their own company towards more focused on oncology to collect genomics data. I mean, you obviously need a huge amount of capital to start because the reagents that you use are not cheap. The machines that you use to map genomic sequences are not cheap. And on top of it, if you're able to invest that kind of money, finding the right patient set, getting the consent, getting the right data, and then having enough of it to run the right protocols is a huge amount of challenge. And while I probably that's where my knowledge ends. I'm not an expert in the field, but I do believe that once people have had the right data, in the right amount of data, I do feel that you'll start seeing the impact. The reason TB is easy to do because you can go to any government and they can give you thousands and thousands and lakhs of X-rays, which you can use to diagnose or train your network for TB. Similarly, if you go for head injury and trauma cases, you can get multiple thousands of CT scans. So these are easily available. But when you start talking about genomic data, which is needed for precision medicine and higher level of diagnosis, how many people are generating it? So that's where I feel there's a challenge. So I've tried to answer the first and third. I think the other question was a little different, which is more about why do people still want to go to the doctor? Listen, I don't know if I have a perfect answer for it. It could be cultural. I think people still feel a need to go see a doctor to feel that they're being cared for. That could be it. I'm sorry, I'm not. I can't speak intelligently about it. It's more, in my opinion, more cultural. But there could be so many other reasons which I'm missing.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. So let's take the questions directly from audience now, from the participants. So we have Vikram Nair and Jack Joseph raise the hand now. So I request others also, if you want to ask the question directly, please raise your hand. So opening up to Vikram Nair. So I request you to kind of keep the questions short and to the point. Please go ahead.
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you for asking the question. Hi, Marut.
Hi.
I'm involved with the and communities which we know are underserved. What are your thoughts in terms of the next generation diagnostic devices, and as you said, medical tech that will penetrate those areas?
I'm sorry, I lost the first part of your question. So I did get that you want to know about what's the generation of medical devices, but in what context? Can you say that again?
Yeah. So how do you get the portable medical devices,
Yes.
scanners, etc.?
Yeah.
to the rural communities, and what are the next types of products that you see? Because that's an area that we actually are exploring, and we'll be curious to know what G is doing in that area.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So listen, there is a need. The need of having a portable scanner which can be used to diagnose an ailment on the field in a remote corner of the country, or in other countries. I think there is no denying the need. The big problem is that as you try to miniaturize the device, you are placing a much bigger burden on the healthcare professional who's using it to make sure they're collecting the right data, and then the quality of image is good enough to be interpreted, right? So there is a it's a continuum. So there is a compromise between how small and on the field can you be versus the quality that you're getting out, which can be interpreted with somebody with the right skill set. So you have to kind of innovate in that space. Now, some parts of the medical device industries have done it well. For example, ultrasound,
Mm.
what we call vScan, which has been used in remotest corner of the world, in Africa, in India, and has been successfully, if I may say so, been able to create interventions, especially in the mother and child space during pregnancy. So I feel very good about the fact, and we've been able to put a lot of AI enhancement, which assists the healthcare professional, a midwife in this case, to find the right course of action. So they have done very well in that space. There are companies in the space of breast cancer detection. Eye breast exam is one of them that comes to mind, which GE partnered with a few years back, which are taking breast cancer detection to the villages, to the remotest villages, to the remotest communities in Africa. They've done very well, right? And that's kind of an indication that tells me that if you have the right technology, which gives you decent results, we can't expect awesome results, but decent results which can be interpreted by the low quality of skilled manpower that's available. If you have those three things, you're good. You're ripe for disruption. Now, unfortunately, other areas, for example, MRI, PET CTs, and the bigger machines, we have not been able to create portable versions, for lack of a better word, which could go into the rural setup and create a same quality or acceptable quality of image, which can be interpreted uh, by a low skilled workforce, right? So to summarize, and it's a probably long answer to a short question, if you can optimize between the product, the acceptable quality of image, which can work with a healthcare professional which has reasonably low skill set, if you can innovate with those three constraints, listen, I think it's ripe for disruption. But we haven't seen too many areas other than the two that I spoke about, which have done it well.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, we've got some of the technology, but we don't have the hardware. That's I think that's the same issue that you're talking about. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, great. Thank you.
No problems.
So, Jacob also. So request you to kind of be brief and kind of to the point.
See, we did a
Please go ahead.
research. We did a research for 30 years and came out with a
I apologize.
uh,
I can't hear at all.
uh, yeah, that is it. We developed a spectroscopy. That is it. The technology for spectroscopy. That is it. The prototype has been developed, and it has been tested with the molecules. And that is it is useful for the um, uh, preventive measures development for the COVID. Uh, that is the corona virus mutation control. So another thing is that the same technology can be enhanced for the for a new device that's a, there is a check of control and feedback mechanism device for the to treat cancer. That can be there. So that is it. So in that thing that is we uh, seek that co-creation partnership with the because they are already under that is resonance, that is ultrasound perturbation. So that will be something. This technology can be integrated. Uh, so how that
Check,
is
check, sir, your voice is too feeble. Let me kind of put the question across. So he's mentioned that he has developed two products. So what is the opportunity for co-creation?
no single product. It is two steps. That this technology can be adopted for the next thing for the cancer. But this COVID infection, that is it for the identification of the molecules. Same thing can be integrated with another set of devices that is made for the treatment of cancer.
Yeah. So listen, I think a lot more information will be needed for us to, for me to at least even comment on this. So why don't we take this offline? If you can send me some material on what the technology is and where you are in your development process, I'm more than happy to connect you to both GE folks as well as non-GE. I mean, there are a lot of people who are supporting incubators in the health system. Social Alpha by Tata Trust is another example. I'm more than happy to connect you. But to make a comment on can we work together on developing the technology without knowing too much of details, it's going to be tough, sir. So if you send me the details, I'm happy to take a look at it.
Uh, no, the thing is, the only thing I can abstraction only that I can give, that is already in that this our website, because there is a lot of patent issues and everything is there. No, the thing I cannot expose everything unless they sign for
Sure, sir. I mean, listen, if there are patent, there are NDAs to take care of that, non-disclosure agreements. But I don't think anybody worth their salt would comment on, on co-creation of any technology without having a complete understanding of what the technology is. So I would encourage you to see whatever
I
can,
understand.
and I'm happy to,
So
more than happy to make the connection.
one request, if you could share your official mail ID or how you can your coordinates, how you can contact in the chat, that'd be great. So he wants
Yeah,
to know
yeah, sure.
how to send the mail. So next is Mr. Subodh. Subodh, you are on. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes, sir. Actually, I was asking about the since you mentioned the telemedicine sector. So in that, it is more of a hyper local thing. So how can we integrate or collaborate with hyper local? Like there is a perception, no, that this doctor is just for this particular type of things you can say. So how can we integrate and develop a solution that it is hyper local also for the customers? Yeah.
I honestly don't know. I don't know how to answer that question on how to integrate telemedicine and hyper local. Honestly, sorry, man. I wish I had an answer for you. Beats me completely.
So
So, Arnab, Marut, we are almost 4 o'clock now. It's almost 4 o'clock. So, we'll take one more question and then
Sure,
we'll wind up the session. Is that fine?
sure.
So, Arnab, please go ahead. Arnab, you are on mute. Arnab, sorry, we can't hear you. Hello? Arnab, request if you can just type your question in the chat, that would be great. I will read it out. There seems to be some issue. So one question which Mr. Regin asked, I'll take it as the last one. So it's about: do you think the regulatory approvals will be faster than post-COVID. In the post-COVID world, the regulations will be faster. What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I do feel that the cycle time that was used at some of the conditions. For example, there is a condition in a medtech industry that if you want to, let's say, even import a device, you have to get a prototype. The prototype, even if it's FDA approved, the prototype has to be put in India, and X number of months it has to be tested. So the government is already looking at diluting some of those requirements. For example, now most of the procurement that is happening, Indian standard, a BIS certification is more than enough. People have been asked not to ask for a FDA certificate, for example, right? So I do feel that this industry will go through some churn, and there will be an opportunity to reduce the cycle times and some level of bureaucracy. Now, I do feel that some minimum level of standard need to be maintained. Otherwise, some of these things can be life threatening. But yes, there would definitely be a relaxation in some standards, and the type approvals would become much faster.
Okay, great. So one last question is from Mr. Nishan. So he's asking about the universal care. So given the Indian context, considering we don't have treatment clinical standards defined yet, do you think the universal care will be in action?
I wish I had a crystal ball, to be honest with you. Many countries have tried universal care, and 99, I think Brazil is the only example of a successful universal health coverage model. There is no other successful example of universal healthcare coverage. US is struggling with what they call Obamacare. NHS is borderline bankrupt with 21% of GDP going in. Indonesia tried it with 300 million people to try that coverage. India, to some extent. Now, not saying that we can't succeed. I think that'll be too pessimistic. But I think a very unique approach would be needed for us in India to be successful, just given the scale of population, underserved population, which doesn't have access to healthcare, and the investment that has gone into infrastructure. I think they're just poles apart. The amount of money that is needed to create that infrastructure to cater to the population is very difficult. And I wrote an article in HT a few months back, which is, and I spoke about, and I wrote about, and I spoke about in an interview about why the government is focusing so much on preventive health, because they don't even want you to enter the primary health cycle, because as soon as you enter, you would realize that the resources are far too limited and the population is far too high, which is why I think this government is really smart. They're talking about yoga, they're talking about health, overall health management. So that's probably one way I feel we'll probably achieve universal healthcare coverage, because we don't want people to fall sick at all. And in my head, that's as close as we will get, at least in the next decade or so, towards achieving universal healthcare coverage. Other than that, I mean, if you really want to have a Brazil style of universal healthcare, it'll take a long time. It'll be a lot of iterations, and it'll cost a lot of money. Not saying we can't get there, but the road will be very tough.
So I think Maruti already answered this question, but Arnab was asking again on the collaboration. So he was asking specifically, will G Healthcare like to collaborate with us in celiac disease space? So I think you answered already, but if you want to have add on anything to that, then
No. Interest of time, I think nothing more to add. Listen, if there is close to
yeah.
us, I'm happy to make the connections to see what can be done.
Great. So again, already 4 o'clock, and has been an amazing session. And a lot of questions are still coming in. People are posting a lot of more questions, but because of the paucity of time, I think we have to take it a call and call it a day now.
Perfect. Hey, listen, thanks a lot for having me here. I really appreciate you guys coming and participating, and thanks for all your questions. I hope
Yeah,
it was a little bit of help at least.
it's our privilege to. It has been an amazing session. The way you engaged, it's been pretty engaging. You answered almost all the kind of snowballs that came across you. And once this COVID lockdown and everything over, we wish we could host you in Kerala and have a physical session.
Absolutely, I love the place. I've been there many times, and I would love to come again.
Great, great, great.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Good
Thank
talking to
you.
you. Bye.
And thanks to Neha also. Neha is also from the GE team. And thanks, Neha, for joining us and kind of supporting us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks to all the participants for being patient and kind of posting all